Sugar. A few hundred years ago, this was an extremely expensive luxury good. These days, we find it in nearly everything we eat and drink. In today's episode of Commodity Brief, we're going to be focusing on sugar. Sugar is primarily from two sources, from sugar cane and from sugar beet, both with slightly different uses. Now, in terms of sugar itself, the main use of sugar is in food production, but we also have quite considerable quantities which go into ethanol production due to its very high calorific value. If we have a look at the production and the trade of sugar, we can see the progression of the trade in raw and white sugar over the last 10-15 years or so. And more interestingly, if we have a look into the market share of the raw sugar exporters here, first of all, Brazil. Brazil went from having a very small market share to being by far the largest producer. This is the dominant country in the world sugar markets. Otherwise, other countries, as we can see, have changed over time. And in terms of the white sugar exporters, here we can see Brazil does not have quite as much of a share. That means not as much sugar is being refined in sugar and then exported as white sugar. More is being exported as raw sugar. But that also explains why we've had the growth here of these refineries. These are countries which will import raw sugar and then they will refine it into white sugar, and then they will export it as such again. And so these things have changed very rapidly over the last couple of years. In terms of the transportation of sugar, we have a number of forms of transportation. First of all, for raw sugar, which is going to be refined in the future, it tends to be transported in bulk. And so it will be poured into a vessel and we'll be transporting quantities up to 30,000-40,000 tons of bulk sugar on one vessel. Now, here we need to be quite careful of the holds themselves, but because we know it's going to be refined before being consumed, we don't need to be that careful as it is. Otherwise, white sugar, refined sugar, we need to be very, very, very careful. And so that's predominantly transported in bags, either bags which are loaded into vessels or bags which are transported in containers themselves. Now, in terms of the risks associated with transporting sugar, there are quite a few risks and we have to be very, very careful. First of all is a fire in the cargo holds. These are often set off by a labourer throwing a cigarette butt in, and then that can smoulder and then it can burst into flames. We have to be very, very careful. And if there is fire, we have to use CO2 systems, carbon dioxide systems, in order to put out the fire, because if we use water sprinklers, then we've put out the fire, but we've also ruined the whole cargo itself. A couple of other risks are we have to be careful of foreign odours getting into the cargo and making the cargo unacceptable for future consumption. We also have to be very, very careful of moisture content, of mould forming in the sugar itself and then it not being interesting. And obviously we have to be careful of infestation, because rats and other insects would love to be in a cargo of sugar. So that brings us to the end of this episode of Commodity Brief focusing on sugar. We'll be coming back soon with other episodes looking at different commodities. Please click back soon.